As we honor and recognize women from all walks of life, it would be remiss for us not to mention a young woman who, on her own journey, changed the course of life for many. Last year, the country stood at a standstill as a woman in leadership who, together with others, brought not only her university, but thousands of students from other universities together to fight for access to free and quality education for all. And this was under the banner of Fees Must Fall movement. We're joined by the former Wits SRC president, Shaeera Kalla, to discuss the journey as a young woman in student leadership and also her own character of courage, because to lead thousands of people and then confront the government in the manner that you did takes a lot of courage, I must say. And Shaeera, pleasure to have you with us here on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Much appreciated. Well, at the time, you know, when you had the stoppages at Wits, the demonstrations, before the real Fees Must Fall started, and you were calling for the Vice Chancellor to come back from a meeting in Durban and so on, you know, one thought it was just going to be an incident that by the weekend will die off. And just after the weekend, it gained momentum. Is that, did you imagine it, that it would work that way?
Well, I think that anything in history, any event in history is often remembered as an event, but when we actually think about it, it's not just that. It takes months of planning. We know that even in our celebration of the Women's March this year and in August, their preparation had to take place underground. With us, there were some things that had to take place underground. For example, we couldn't actually tell the university or anybody in advance that we were going to be having a shutdown at 6 o'clock in the morning on the 14th of October last year. But our mobilization was free. We could go out and mobilize students and create that awareness in a democratic dispensation. The kind of securitization we faced after that and the response from the police, private security as well, was quite brutal. But I don't think that we can say it was the same brutality that our counterparts in 1956 and in 1976 faced. So this is a very important year in our history. And it, you know, we're celebrating Women's Month, but we also need to be critically aware of the patriarchal society that we still live in. And my experience as well as a woman, it's very Wits-centric, and even when you introduced me, you know, I'm painted as someone who led thousands of students. And that also makes me introspective in that there were many other women who I relied on, Nompendulo as well, and others who weren't even in leadership positions, without whom, you know, the workers as well, Mamzodwa and others, who we looked at as mothers and as examples, and as people who were also part of the struggle, because the workers' struggle and the student struggle are inherently intertwined.
But here's the thing, Shaeera, and we'll talk about, you know, because at the end of the day, it is the character of the individuals, you know, that also looms large on some of these major events as they happen, right? But sometimes it can be a situation that thrusts you into leadership and not necessarily yourself wanting to be. Were you a willing leader or a reluctant leader of the Fees Must Fall campaign?
Look, I was the president of the SRC at the time, so I had to prepare myself very well. But what we were preparing ourselves for and what we actually faced were two very different things. So I wouldn't say I was reluctant in the beginning. But as time went forward, I had to sort of, you know, fight for that space.
Yes.
And I remember a moment really clearly where, you know, it was in the beginning of the protests and it still hadn't become a national movement. And we had just shut all the gates and we were going to Solomon Mahlangu House, formerly known as Senate House at Wits University. And I had given the instruction, okay, we're taking students to this place because we're going to debrief and decide on a way forward. And we're going to have our mass meeting. And I went to a few of the other gates, and by the time I got to Solomon Mahlangu House, Vuyani and Mcebo had the loud hailer.
Yes.
And they were giving instructions and kind of talking to students, and I mean, that was fine. Mcebo Dlamini and me have quite a close relationship because he was the president of my SRC initially, and then I took over from him. And Vuyani told me at that point, don't worry, we'll let you speak. And I got very angry at that comment because I'm the president of the SRC. who are you to tell me that you will give me a place to speak? And as women, we've constantly been put on the sidelines through this. And when we remember our, 1976 as well, women are kind of erased from the narrative,
Yes.
even though they played an even more important role in some instances in organizing, in planning, in leading. We met Mama Winnie yesterday, and we accompanied her to vote. And that was such a huge honor for me to meet one of my heroes and somebody I look up to in such a profound way. And she herself told us that this is nothing new.
Yes.
We've always lived in a patriarchal society. But what we need to do as women is support and love each other and move forward together and challenge the status quo together.
But Shaeera, sometimes in life, our own personal experiences through the journey of life may shape us, and instill a particular outlook on life. In your case, are there such specific experiences?
I think there definitely are. But one of the biggest, guiding forces for me was being brought up in a Muslim home, and being brought up in an inherently, and in a very patriarchal community as well. But in a community where, even though it was patriarchal, there were women that I could look up to that really showed, created the path. And we know we can name many of them. But for me, my mother always taught me and instilled in me that stand up against injustice, even if it's against yourself. And that is an Islamic principle. The Quran teaches us that. And it's a lesson that we can learn, because even though we might be brought up in communities that are patriarchal and our cultures might teach things that we don't necessarily agree with, we must stand up to them and bring people towards a path that we think is more progressive. And for me, fighting those battles from a very young age did create a very assertive character, and also the kind of character that I think sees that people are sometimes victims of their own upbringing and of their own societies, and of their own stereotypes. And so instead of shunning people, what we need to do is really highlight the contradictions that exist in our societies and challenge them in ways that bring us together and that build instead of destroy.
Now, it's Women's Month, August month, and of course, our Constitution also articulates what should happen, what kind of society we have to fashion, and that women need to be empowered and they must be encouraged to be assertive. What do you think of younger women today in South Africa? Are they living up to what the Constitution says we should do? And what are they dealing with? How are they progressing?
How are young women progressing? I think just by fighting for the spaces that many young women occupy today, that in itself is a struggle. I think just by waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning as a worker at Wits University and coming and working and sweating and toiling for, to feed your family, that in itself is a struggle. I think by women students going to work and going to school, and facing the harshest conditions, having to be able to pay for sanitary towels when, you're taxed for being a woman in many ways. The everyday things, the everyday struggles that women, partake in, sometimes the strongest moments are in those everyday struggles. And I think that we as young people need to start not taking those everyday struggles for granted. So when we talk about free sanitary towels or free sanitary wear for young girls in schools, when we talk about teenage pregnancy, when HIV, HIV awareness in schools, because we know that this cohort of young people is the most affected by AIDS. When we talk about these societal issues, we need to move beyond small campaigns and talk about how we are going to structurally challenge the patriarchal capitalist society that we find ourselves in, that is a cause of homelessness, is a cause of women, girls missing school every day, and is a cause of women not being, not having high positions in the corporate sector as well. So even though we have a very active and robust, we have many women in the public sector, we'll be judged by the way in which the most marginalized women experience life. And if we say that, then we have a long way to go in really challenging the status quo.
We're making some progress, but much more still needs to be done. And I think the more we hear from women, including young women who are already in leadership positions, who are as confident, assertive as yourselves, then we will reorientate ourselves towards an all-inclusive and very sensitive society that cares and makes sure that we live up to the aspirations of our Constitution. Much appreciated, Shaeera.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. Well, one of the leading lights and emerged as the leader of the Fees Must Fall campaign, or one of them, and we know they achieved some immediate goals, but there's still a lot of work to be done going forward.